1941, my dad, Eben Holloway, joined the U.S. Air Force. Back then it was called the U.S. Army Air Corps. And he decided that was the best thing to do. I think that was paying the most back then of all the services. So he joined that, and it was still sort of maverick back at that time period. They're driving old planes and not a lot compared to the Air Force today. But they did have quite a bit of adventures. He told me one time that they decided to take a plane. They were taking it for just a little test drive. They ended up going to Oklahoma, and then they figured they better come back. So they came back, but unfortunately they landed in a field and got stuck in a ditch, and all the ambulances got called out there, and the whole town of Alexandria drove out there, including their commanders. So they got in a little bit of trouble for that. But it was a fun time during the Louisiana maneuvers. He specifically said he really enjoyed taking the flour sacks and throwing them out the plane as they flew over the troops. That would actually mark the bomb burst to show that you would be dead at that time period. And so one of the judges would come up to you, and if you had flour on you, he would say, "Oh, I'm sorry, you're wounded or you're dead," depending on how much you had on you. So that was the Air Force's contribution. But back then, unfortunately, the Air Force and the planes were very limited. There were not a lot of them. So they actually had some aircraft carriers go into the Gulf of Mexico, and they flew some Navy planes over there to assist in dropping the flour sacks and pretending to be enemy planes. So that pretty well put to use every plane that they had available in the U.S. Army and the U.S. Navy during the 1940 and 41 maneuvers. Also, at that time, the observation planes were these big, huge O-47 planes, very unwieldy. And in 1940, they came out with this little smaller plane. And anybody watched the movie about the Battle of the Bulge and the one that Henry Fonda's flying? Well, that's a Grasshopper. And that plane was tested during the Louisiana maneuvers and found to be very, very dependable, much like the U.S. Army Jeep. And so that's what they used this plane for, is observation, ferrying small amounts of troops or commanders or artillery designations. So you could actually see where to shoot your artillery at and how far. So the L-4 Grasshopper was also a very important part of the Louisiana maneuvers, air war.
The footage that you gave me, is that your dad's unit?
That's my dad's unit. That's the 15th Bomb Squadron. They were part of the 27th Bomb Group. And amazingly, they were picked, the 15th Bomb Squadron was picked by General Patton to help go and train all of the paratroopers that were training for the first time at Camp Benning, Georgia. So they were sent over there to train them. So when the 27th Bomb Group and the other three squadrons in the group got deployed in November of 1941 to the Philippines, they were over in Georgia. So luckily, my dad and his group missed out on the Bataan Death March, because that's what happened to all those members of the 27th Bomb Group.
Good thing to miss out on.
Indeed.
Now, they were in the 40 and 41 maneuvers both?
They were in the early part of the 41 maneuvers, but then they went to train the paratroopers over in Benning on a full-time basis and stayed there. And then when war started on December 7th, 1941, they were the only Air Force available that were trained in that area. So they went over and did submarine patrols on the Atlantic coastline from Maine down to Florida.
Okay. Aren't you the source for the Patton toy cannon story?
I could, yes.
Can you tell that? Because
yes,
I haven't got it.
Okay. It seems that when Patton is making the move towards Shreveport with his troops, and of course you had the Red Army and the Blue Army trying to outmaneuver one another and attack one another. And so Patton, of course, is leading his troops north, and he tries to cheat a little bit, and so he wants to go through Texas, even though you're not supposed to, because that's neutral territory, and swing around where he knows that the other army is, and get behind them, between them and Shreveport. Well, on the way there, he runs into a cannon sound. He hears this cannon going off fairly frequently, and he thinks, "Oh well, okay, well my troops are being attacked." So he stops his army and he deploys all of his scouts, and they're searching all over the area, and it actually is up around Natchitoches, and they come across this plantation house, Oakland Plantation, and on the front porch these boys are playing with this little small carbide cannon, but it sounds like a real one. So the story goes that, you know, these were the only troops that were able to stop Patton, and they weren't troops at all, but two young boys, and so that carbide cannon is still today used. The family, the Prudhomme family, brings it out every year, and they fire it and show people what it was like at Oakland Plantation when Patton was coming through.
Those suckers are loud.
They're very loud.
I've heard, you know, my dad had a hardware store before him, my grandfather, and they used to take carbide and wrap it up and throw it and buy Beth, and you get fish.
Early fishing.
Yes, indeed. You had some insights about the Lee Street riot, I think.
Yeah, and you know, I was interviewing several veterans, and I ran across this guy who was an interesting fella. He lives up in Bastrop, and he was a lieutenant in one of the companies of the Nisi Regiment, which of course was the Japanese American troops that fought for us in the war. And so I was talking to him and interviewing him about that, and then at some point at the end of the interview, I always ask an off-the-wall question like, what was your favorite beer that you drank during the war, or something like that. And I just so happened to ask this gentleman, I said, well, what about the Lee Street riot? What do you know about that? And he said, do I have to answer you? And I said, well, no, but you know, it'd be nice because there's not a lot of information out there on it. And he proceeded to tell me that his dad was the provost marshal for Alexandria. And he explained the whole story to me, which nobody's really been able to do other than bits and pieces. But it seems that the troops, mainly from a anti-tank company of black troops, were in town from Camp Claiborne. And Lee Street at this time was a big bar district. It was a big, I mean, there were thousands of people out on the street all the time when the soldiers came in. So they're out there having a good time, and they run across some women that they start talking to. Well, the local men got a little offended that these Yankee guys from New York are trying to hit on their women. So they had a little bit of altercation between the two, and then some white soldiers came in and tried to quiet them down, and they got involved in the altercation as well. And so finally it escalated where the local police couldn't stop it, and even the local provost couldn't stop it. So this guy's dad actually called out a Pennsylvania regiment from Camp Claiborne, and they showed up, and they actually fired into the conflicting soldiers and civilians that were fighting in the middle of the street. And a lot of them were killed, not an awful lot, but there were several dozen killed. And what they did was they took the bodies and they put them on the back of a truck, and then they buried them as a training accident. And they told all the people in Alexandria that observed it that if you tell anybody about this, that we will go ahead and basically put you and your family in Leavenworth for the rest of your life. And so that's why nobody talked about it for years and years. But just now, people that even as kids watched it are coming out or telling the stories that their parents told them. So we are getting some information.
Have you talked to Haywood Jordan?
No, I haven't talked to him.
Do you know who he is?
Yes, I do know who he is.
He told me that his dad was there.
Really?
And that probably would not have lived through it if somebody hadn't pulled him into one of the restaurants on the street.
It was pretty dangerous.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like a good place to have been.
No, and again, you put north and south and fighting over women, and you can get a whole lot of trouble right there.
Yeah.
But yes, there were positive things though that happened with the black troops that came to central Louisiana, but that wasn't one of them, unfortunately.
Well, What would be some of the positive
Well, one of the positive things is you had high quality training, so that when these anti-tank units were trained at Camp Claiborne, they were actually used by Patton in his offensive into Germany. And, you know, he put them to work just like he did everybody else. He wasn't particularly racist. If you were serving under him, you served under him, and you did what he wanted you to do. So that was a positive thing, that they got a good training there. And also, one of the unusual units that was there was the 369th Coast Artillery Unit from New York. And previously, in World War I, they had been known as the 15th New York Infantry. That particular group in World War I was, you may know, as the Harlem Hellfighters. Well, this group had changed to Coast Artillery for World War II, and prior to that, they trained at Camp Claiborne, and their commander was a Colonel Benjamin O. Davis Sr. And of course, some of y'all may recognize that name, as Benjamin O. Davis Sr. was the first black general in the U.S. Army. And his son, Benjamin O. Davis Jr., was the head of the Red Tails, the, what's the group? Tuskegee Airmen. So you know, that was pretty a noted group as well. So this 369th Coast Artillery did stay and learned quite a bit in central Louisiana as well. And they continue to be a part of, although they changed designation, they're no longer Coast Artillery, the unit still lives on in the New York military system.
Now, when your dad came back, he came back to Alexandria?
Yep.
Did he have any stories to tell about his homecoming?
No, and in fact, he didn't. It took 50 years to after the war for him to get anything out of him, other than he flew with Patton. And you know, I had sort of, I didn't disbelieve him, but I just sort of took it with a grain of salt when he used to tell me I flew with Patton, and in my head I'm thinking, well, wait a second, Patton was a tanker, and before that a cavalryman, and so how could he fly? So when we went to my dad's 50th year reunion of World War II, I walked in the door with him, and there's about 15 guys there, and they say, oh, it's Holloway, the guy that flew with Patton. So I made him explain the story, and he would fly with Patton and his commanding officer. They would all get in one plane, a three-seater A-20, and fly from Benning, Georgia, to the Louisiana maneuvers. And he said Patton would always fly outside of town in the field so that nobody knew that he was coming. He wanted everybody to be caught off guard when he drove up. So he would always do that. And one time it was real cold, and he offered my dad his flight jacket to wear, and my dad said, no, that's okay. He was being a proper young child. And so Patton said, well, okay, well, how about this? We're going by your house if you want me to drop you off. And my dad said, no, I put a call into my family, and we'll see if they're going to come, I'll come here or whatever. Well, it turned out they never showed up, and Patton chastised him a little bit for when he came back, because he didn't take his offer to stop by his house. But I will tell you that when he did come back, they didn't come back to Alexandria immediately. They put him in a hotel in Miami for, I think, like 6 weeks or so, because they had started the war before anybody else did. And so when they came back to Alexandria, the war was still going on, and they just sort of felt hamstrung, he told me, because they couldn't really do anything. And they were so used to assisting in the war, and here they are sitting home, and the war's already still going on, and they can't do anything. So it was sort of hard.
When did he come back?
He came back in late 1944. So the war, yes, it was getting towards the end, but it was still going on. Yeah. But they had been in it for full 4 years. They started, like I said, in 1940. They did the first bombing mission on occupied Europe on July 4th, 1942, which I would get into occasional, a little bit of arguments with some of the B-17 pilots and crew at the Army Air Force historical meetings, because they'd go, oh, well, on August the 17th, all the air war started in Europe with the B-17, and then I'd have to correct them and say, well, no, if you go check on the website for the U.S. Air Force, you'll see that it's July 4th, 1942, when the A-20 started the air war. And they didn't like that, but that was just how it was. It was history.
Way it goes.
Exactly.
My uncle was in the Battle of the Bulge. He never talked about it to his own kids at all. He talked to me and my dad about it once.
Wow.
And
Most are like that.
We just caught him at the right time.
Well, and there's a gentleman that is in a nursing home by the Target in Alexandria, and I've got to go see him because Charles Neal said that he is a veteran of the Bataan Death March in the 27th Bomb Group, which was the group that broke off from my dad. And I don't want to talk to him about the Bataan Death March, but I am going to show him some video like I showed you of the 15th Bomb Squadron during the maneuvers, and maybe let him remember a nicer time.
Yeah.
Because he's still got all his faculties from what I understand.
There's a fellow, I don't know if he's still alive now or not, he's actually related to my first wife. His last name was Bollick, B-O-L-L-I-C-H. He has a book that's at the World War II Museum, Who's in the Bataan Death March.
Oh, wow.
And the book's about that.
Wow.
But you know Jerry Sanson, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Who's working with me on this. His uncle missed the Bataan Death March, hid out in the jungle with the Filipinos for a year, and then got captured and executed by the Japanese.
Wow.
It's Hayden Lawrence that the school is named for.
Yeah, yeah.
Buckeye.
Wow.
So there's just all sorts of great stories. You know, some of them pretty sad.
Well, I'm really glad my dad missed that.
Yeah, yeah. That's.
I mean, and to be basically they were known as Patton's Private Air Force. And in fact, like I was showing you the movie poster from Parachute Battalion, they report, you know, here they are, they're movie stars, their air group is the one that's used in filming the first paratroopers and filming this movie. Buddy Ebsen's in the movie, Harry Carey, and doggone it if it doesn't open on December 8th, 1941. And nobody goes to see it.
I have to get a picture of that poster, 'cause
Yeah.
I'm gonna use that story.
Yeah, I mean, that's just sad, really sad. But yeah, it's the maneuvers is a really underrated major thing that the U.S. Army did, and it was valid and it trained the troops. But unfortunately, the good feelings and everything's fair in war and all this, that all went out the door. The training was nice, but it still softened you up a little bit because everybody was feeding you and inviting you into your house. So when you actually got to sit to the jungles in the you know, in the Pacific, or you got to sit to the, you know, the snow in Germany, you weren't prepared for that.
Yeah. Better some than none.
That's true.
Tell me about the jacket.
Well, this is a Air Force jacket. My DeLorean sticker on here because in 1995 when they had the reunion, I was named the historian for the 15th Bomb Squadron, which was a very big honor. And they dropped in about 300 pictures in my lap and the flight logs and all this kind of stuff, and said, okay, it's your time to write a history. So right now I'm working with LSU Press. They're doing a collaboration of Louisianians in World War II, and I'm going to be the editor on that and try to collect these stories and get it published.
That's awesome.
Yes, indeed.
I can't wait to see it.
I can't wait for you to contribute to it.
Well, I don't know if I'm competent to do that, but
I believe so.
You want to hold that?
Yeah.
There we go. And I'll just zoom in on it.
Oh, wow. See, I'm not a good duster at my house.
Well, neither am I. Pick it up and there you go. So, pull back just a little bit at the hole.
Lean back, or?
No, that's good.
Okay.
That's good. All right.
I'll tell you why I have that coat thing, too.
Okay.
When I worked at the Maneuvers Museum in my office, I took my mom's working 1943 Coke machine that still works. And,
Still works now?
Yeah. And I brought it and put it in the office. And I hung this up behind it because there was an order that General Marshall came out with in 1942. And every military installation was ordered to have a Coca-Cola machine available for the troops anywhere in the world. And if that's not a monopoly, I don't know what is.
Well, they should use that in one of those anti-Pepsi commercials.
Yes, indeed. And I'm going to tell you about Fanta, too.
Okay.
Are you familiar with Fanta's story?
No, I've drunk plenty of Fanta.
Okay, well, I mean, you may not drink it after this. As Hitler's invading Poland, Fanta factories, Coke factories over there, they have a Coca-Cola factory, except they run out of all the makings of the Coke. So Coke is not supplying them anymore because they're doing all this invading. And so they go to the German scientists and they come up with a fruit drink. And Fanta is short for Fantasy, which was a fantasy in German. And so they would make these fruit drinks. Instead of using the Coke syrup, they'd make fruit syrup. And that's how Fanta came into being as a alternative for Hitler for Coca-Cola.
I think I'll write that off.
I did. I used to drink Fanta all the time. I was like, wow.
Yeah,
nobody knows, you know.
That'll put you right on. Well, no, most people don't know about the Volkswagen either.
No, really, one car, one family car. Very
All
clever
right.
idea.
Yeah. You have anything you'd like to add?
I think that's about it, other than if we don't take all of our history and learn it and pass it on, what your grandfather and your great-grandfather and your parents tell you, no matter what time period it is, if you don't preserve it for future generations, then we won't learn from the mistakes that we've made in the past, and we'll keep repeating the same mistakes. So it's best to preserve that history and pass it on for future generations so we can learn.
All right. Excellent.